Welcome back. It's been 2 weeks, hasn't it?
Weird.
Kind of weird. It's kind of weird to have a break at that point of the semester. It's my fault. I apologize. It was something I really couldn't get out of once I wasn't sure what was going to happen this semester, but that's okay. Maybe kind of it's like getting the bye week within the first couple weeks of the season. And it's like, gosh, you know, I wish I could have had that break a little bit later when I was really exhausted and needed the break. But, oh well, it just happens that way. You're going to get a spring break anyway. Okay, so for tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to revisit some things with the theories of learning and their connections to assessment. What I did is I took that Google Doc that the different groups worked on, and there's a couple different ways I was kind of thinking about how to do it. One was kind of talk through and kind of negotiate some of those things. And I figured, well, in this case, I think maybe just giving some additional perspectives on what could be populated here and then making sense of that and seeing how it relates to some other things that were already put up there might be a different way to try to do this. So you're going to see, it's not to say that what I've put there in red is the correct answer and what you put there in the original text is wrong. It's just some additional things to consider. So I'm just trying to elaborate a little bit further. It's not that anything was necessarily way off. And then we'll, before the break, we're going to take a look at some of the distinguishing features of the learning targets that Chappis and colleagues had discussed. What do those really mean, those 5 different learning targets? Because that really sets us up well for next week when we get to kind of assessing beyond recall. And what does that mean? What do these different reasoning goals mean? So there's one of those reasoning targets, or excuse me, one of those learning targets is reasoning, but invested into that one target is a whole host of things that I think is really worth getting our heads around, and we're going to spend a good part of next week and the week after around that. So a couple things, though. In 2 weeks, so just as a reminder, in 2 weeks, we're going to be sharing drafts of assessments in this class. Okay? So it's not that far away. Next week, as noted up there, we're going to be looking at assessing student understanding, and the week following that is going to be focused on kind of task formats and problem contexts and how those are used. So you're probably wondering, well, I just started class, and now I'm being asked to draft an assessment. It's a working draft. So what I'd like you to consider, though, is so knowing that this is kind of the first assignment you have in 2 weeks, you're bringing it to class so it can be discussed and you can receive feedback from others in your group. So the better that version of assessment is, the better feedback you're going to get. If it's hastily put together, I'm not telling you anything. You're adults. If you put it together at the last minute, the kind of feedback you're going to get isn't going to be as productive because it's going to be stuff you probably could have figured out on your own anyway. So put a little bit of time and thought into drafting up an assessment in a content domain that is of value to you. You choose the audience. You choose the content. It doesn't even have to be math or science, although most of you are probably going to do something in math and science. And it doesn't have to be, it could be in the university setting, it can be in the K-12 setting. So what I am wanting you to do, though, is make sure you clarify who your intended audience is. You're not just designing a science assessment. Well, for who? I mean, it makes a big difference in terms of how you're drawing up those questions. The other piece is I want you to think about including some problem in there, some question or task where there's use of context. You're trying to dovetail either that science or math content or other content area with a context, so a problem context of sorts. So it doesn't have to entirely be around a problem context. You can have some kind of basic, straightforward kind of questions, but I want you to attempt to use context in at least one of the questions that you have on this assessment, because it's going to play into the assessment design process a little bit differently than if you were going to have, let's say, a procedural item. Access is really It's an all-encompassing word for make sure the language is appropriate, make sure it's accessible to the audience intended. So if you have an intended audience with a high proportion of English language learners, consider that in the design of the task. If you have a high proportion of the audience that I would say, well, when you consider their prior background and knowledge, have that influence to some extent how you're selecting some of those tasks. And then the other piece is thinking beyond recall. It's okay to have some recall items. I'm not saying don't have items that assess recall of knowledge. But I want you to also include a few items on there that go beyond that. So get to some of those reasoning targets within the scope of this draft of assessment. Okay, so those are really the goals. I think that's also outlining the expectations here. Yeah, we haven't discussed context or access yet, so just draw from your current conceptions. You're going to have time to kind of revisit these. You're going to get feedback from the group as we go further and further through the course. You're going to get more ideas from the readings, from our discussions in class, and that's going to kind of feed into other tweaks you make. Yeah, so, and we really dive into this assessing more than recall piece. So some of you already have a pretty good idea what that means. You've explored depth of knowledge, which is kind of similar to this, or you've seen something like an assessment pyramid, maybe in a different class. So, and if you haven't seen any of those things, don't worry. You're going to be familiar with that after next week. So, again, not all of your tasks need to assess more than recall, just a few, a couple of your tasks. I just want you to explore how this comes into play in the selection and design of tasks that you work with. And it doesn't have to be in a finished final version when you come to class in 2 weeks. It's a work in progress. So the main thing is, I would say before next week, since that'll be 1 week before the draft is due, figure out what kind of, where the boundaries are. Figure out the audience, figure out the content domain that you're going to work with. And some of you are going to dive into some resources. You're going to kind of sketch some things out. As with tonight, it's going to cause you to think about, what do I really want to assess? So you're going to probably engage in some kind of goal setting, hopefully. I think that's it. There's a couple things that are on D2L. So there's a Dropbox available. There's actually 2 of them. One focuses, I think they're basic. I want you to upload your drafts to both of those. So you'll also see in D2L, kind of on the sidebar, you're starting to see due dates appearing as kind of a quasi-calendar. So pretty much everything that's listed in the syllabus is assignment. I made sure I adjusted the due dates according to what was in the syllabus, so you can kind of see things that are coming up, and all of the assignments have associated Dropboxes with them. But the one coming up is, there's really 2 Dropboxes. I want you to post your draft of an assessment to both, and there's kind of a reason for that. I'm not going to get into right now. Just make sure you have drafts to post in there. But then also, because some of you those of you who are going to be here face-to-face, bring some drafts that you can share, some printed drafts that you can share with your group. Okay? Not everyone is going to be able to get through everything on the 21st. There's a lot of things we're going to do that night, but some of you are. If you are eagerly trying to draft an assessment to use with an intended audience, and so you want to be the first to get feedback, that's fine. But I can't guarantee that, if you want priority, if you want to move to the front of the line and want to make sure you get feedback on the 21st, I can accommodate that. But I can't guarantee everyone in the group is going to have feedback on the 21st. So there's 2 rounds of the design groups that come in. Actually, that should be 21st. Those who don't share on the 21st will be distributing their assessments for peer feedback on the 28th, and everything should all be wrapped up, and you'll take that into account, plus your own self-assessment of what you want to accomplish, and your final revision is due on the 14th. It seems like a long set of cycles in the process, but some of you are going to use things sooner than that. Some of you are going to use an assessment. You want to use it with the class that you have, and you want to use it end of February. That's fine. And if just let me know that, shoot me an email about that. If you want my feedback earlier than the typical flow of events, just let me know and I can be more responsive. Any questions about the assessment design assignment, this particular one? Diana?
So I have an assessment that I did, like I've already given it like a while back, but it was like one of my ones where I was like taking a chance and like trying something new, and I kind of got feedback on it from a mentor teacher, but I would still really like to know like the class's opinion, and I can obviously go back and edit it and add like the context and what I've been learning in this class. Is that okay? That
was going to be my question. So make sure it has a problem context somewhere in there. Make sure you've addressed reasoning beyond recall.
Okay.
Make sure it addresses the points of making it accessible for the intended audience. If you've done that, you can adapt something and want to put it through the feedback gauntlet.
That format since it's like it's tiered and standards based, so there's different levels. So it's like so yeah. And then I use them a lot, but this one particularly I would really like feedback on, and if I can even add what I've been learning now to it, I would like to see where that comes. So I just want to make sure that it doesn't have to be like something fresh and brand new.
Go for it. Well, it was something that you've already been involved in the design of in the past. I'm fine with that.
Yep. For what we bring to class, do you want just the assessment that we would hand out to our students, or do you want the goals and the targets and all that stuff with the assessment?
On the 21st, you can verbalize most of that. You don't have to have it all written out at that point, but it does need to be written out when you submit it to the Dropbox for the final revision.
So yeah,
because there may be actually some further clarification of, okay, what do you mean by that? Give me more detail. I'm not quite sure what that goal means. So as you're doing some note-taking along the way, as you're getting feedback from the group, it may kind of tweak some of the goals a little bit. Maybe. Any other questions about that assignment? Good? Okay. It does not have to be, some of you might already have this idea that, so you want us to do a unit test. No. You can, but you don't have to. Could be a quiz, could be a project, could be a set of interview questions. You decide the boundaries you want to set up for this assessment. We've seen a whole gamut of different assessment projects that people have brought into this kind of assessment workshop. So someone that worked for a local business was in this class, and he designed a survey for sales folks. We've had also observation protocols that were used to assess in a different way. So it's more informal assessment that was still used to try to get at examples of prompts that could be used with groups as the person was circulating around. But you have to decide what's going to be a useful assessment. Maybe not this semester, or maybe you're going to use it this semester. But if not this semester, my hope is that you're going to choose to do something that's going to be useful to you. Don't do something for me. Make sure it's useful for you. I've got stacks of assessments in my office. I will be delighted to see what you come up with. So I'm not saying I don't care. But make sure, first and foremost, it's something that you're going to be able to make use of. That's the most important thing. Okay. Any questions? Any further questions that I might have missed? Okay. So, Rachel. Rachel?
Aya Halen.
Well, that's Aya. Oh, that's Haley. Annabelle. Who are we? So Rachel's not here? Okay, there's one person missing. Maybe she's doing this asynchronously, so she'll pick this up later. Okay, what I wanted to do is dive in a little bit to, as I mentioned, the assessment. So the whole goal for this was really trying to figure out, with behaviorism, with kind of the cognitive perspective, with the situated socio-cultural perspective, what are different aspects of assessment that come into play? And these are the kind of different aspects of assessment. What would I expect to see as evidence for learning? What would be motivators that would drive me to complete something within this kind of perspective? Classroom norms, task design, feedback. So kind of trying to see different modes that come into play on this. So jump to up with here. I guess I need to stop this. Okay, let's switch here. All right, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here. So it's been a couple weeks. I realize that. I guess this is the best way for me to zoom in. You guys see that okay? All right. So as I said, when I marked things in red, I was just trying to elaborate on some other ideas that could come to mind here. So in terms of things like evidence of student learning, so there wasn't really much else to add here with the behaviors perspective. I think that kind of encapsulated much of what was going to be considered evidence. Really focusing on whether something's correct or incorrect, but speed and time tests and procedural knowledge come into play on this. When we get to the cognitive constructivist perspective, there's some nice pieces of evidence that are identified here. I think one of the keys here when you consider the difference between behaviorist and the cognitive constructivist perspective is it's focused now on the thought processes. How did you get there? How did you get to that result? And so this has really come into intersect math and science education in a significant way, in the sense of when you start seeing tasks that are asking for a particular solution method or a choice of solution method or a justification or an explanation, or you're trying to actually get closer to what are your thoughts about this particular idea? What's your explanation for why this works? I can see that you know how this works and can replicate this procedure, but what does this really mean? So the ability to explain, problem solve, and apply knowledge in new ways, which is something we touched on a couple weeks ago, but I just wanted to make sure it was there. The reason to even bother looking at this again, because it wasn't just an exercise, this is something there's a good chance you might refer to this in the near future. I'll just put it that way. This will be a helpful reference, what you've put together here. So that's one reason to revisit this and give you a feedback in this kind of manner. If some of this doesn't make any sense at all, or you're not quite sure what I'm trying to convey here, or even what the group was trying to convey, this would be a good time to ask questions about it. Socio-cultural, certainly the student interactions, the collaboration, the engaged participation, all these kind of come into play with these descriptions of how we learn. It's not just an individual process. It's through interaction. It's through modeling. That's when someone models something for us and what we learn from that. It's this social negotiation of meaning and ideas and performance that comes into play with this perspective. So it's not, cognitive is a bit more individualistic. This is a bit more, kind of by definition, social, right? So there's one other piece, though, that's, and it's not just what you guys came up with a couple weeks ago. This always happens. We forget that actually the use of tools and resources that are available to us. So use of the internet, use of library resources, asking people questions, going to an expert, going to a novice, going to someone else to get a different perspective. It's the use of tools and resources that informs your own learning that is also part of this too. So it's not just the person or people. It can also be artifacts, resources that we have around us to learn from. Especially nowadays. Where we were 20 years ago with the so-called internet. Some of you might remember what that was like. But I'll tell you, it was a much different place than what we have right now, where you've got streaming video, you've got social media, you've got all sorts of interaction. And it's a bit overwhelming at times, I understand that. But we're making sense of our own opinions, we're making sense of our own knowledge, our perspectives, our ways, our worldview through a lot of these other resources and tools that are out there. And it's become much more amped up over the last 10 years. There's only another thing I would add, maybe, for this is the behaviorist perspective. Certainly rewards are a big piece of this. and positive feedback, but competition can also be in play. There's kind of this differential perspective that comes into play. So competition can be a motivator that plays in the behaviorist perspective, and it often kind of ties into kind of correct and incorrect answers, scores, measuring achievement versus others. How do I think I did well, but I'm not doing as well as the rest of the pack. So that comes into play sometimes with this, but competition more as a tool for motivation draws on this behaviorist perspective. And it can be a positive thing, can also be a negative thing. Depends how it's used. The potential motivator in socio-cultural, I think most of the potential motivators are fine up there in the cognitive perspective, but socio-cultural, it's kind of this process of what's the emerging role that someone has within society, within a classroom, within a working group. So how does that role emerge over time? Does someone take on more of a participatory role, or are they kind of just on the fringe? Are they more engaged in contributing, or are they just kind of waiting to see if their ideas are valid? So there's this kind of negotiation of social acceptance and respect and a sense of belonging that comes with this. So that is a motivator that drives sociocultural learning. There's also the accountability of a group. You're participating often in a group activity, collaborative activity, and I know that can be a positive or negative thing. You want everyone to carry their weight in the group, but there is this sense of accountability that we're responsible for this. So who's going to take the lead and make sure everything's on track? I mean, it happens differently in much different groups. Any questions about this for the backside? Okay. So now I'm just going to kind of go across here, go horizontally. So the behaviorist perspective, this isn't really much new. This is kind of just revisiting some things that the group had put, or a different group had put on the other page. These tend to be questions that have much shorter responses. So this actually feeds into this in task design. The whole notion of, I see this stem, here's my response. I see this, I fill in the blank, I have to recall this. So a lot of these item types are kind of keen into a behaviorist perspective. It's not that there's nothing wrong with this, that's just the nature of the way those tasks are informed by particular theories of learning. It could be procedural in terms of replicating correct steps. What often happens, and what can be misinterpreted, you're going to get more of this in the readings for this week coming up, is just because the tasks are increasing in difficulty doesn't necessarily mean the reasoning has changed. It's just more steps involved. So it's just more things to recall, more places to make mistakes. So just because something is more difficult doesn't necessarily mean it's at a different type of reasoning level. But we'll touch on that a little bit more next week. I think some of this is pretty much familiar to what was before. Any questions about behaviors before we move past this? All right. Cognitive, constructivist. One thing I thought, you have prior knowledge, tap into prior knowledge and learning. So I don't know why I rewrote that there. It's basically the same thing. Focus on relational reasoning and concepts. So relationships, connections between ideas is really kind of this cognitive perspective. And this was in the column of classroom norms. So the kinds of questions that are used, you're trying to help students, you're trying to prompt students to make connections, both in the prompts that you ask, maybe in some of the assessment questions, pulling ideas together, kind of this synthesis idea, trying to see how these relationships are formulated or reformulated. Problem solving appears once again. This column is the type of task. Giving students choice of task, or having a task that's open to various solution strategies. So it's not just, I want to see if you can use this one strategy. It's a task that's open to a range of strategies, and a student has to decide if it's appropriate. So that was already said before. Focus on understanding and processes. And then lastly, I'm only going to pick out a few things here because you can dive right back into this and read it. The link again is found in your email. It's also in week 2 handouts. You'll see the link for this. So related to the resources idea again, okay, this is norms. One idea that comes up in terms of classroom norms is allowing students to engage in the use of the tools of the trade or outside resources. So that's just part of class. Rather than putting a firm wall between, nope, you can't use this, you can't use that, it's allowing students to use resources that would be available to most adults in the world. Okay, and it's not to say that if you pull the calculator from a student, say you can't use a calculator on this, that, you know, that's going to undermine, no, there's sometimes you need to check that too. But basically, yeah, use of the tools of the trade. So whether it's lab equipment, whether it's the type of debates that you see oftentimes in the real world, you know, what does it mean? What's the kind of work that mathematicians and scientists do? How might that inform the space that's opened up in class for students to work on math and science? The other thing, too, is this flattened hierarchy. Students can serve as teachers. So that was already mentioned. The whole notion of group activities when you're organizing to draw on different perspectives. This draws from the socio-cultural perspectives a bit more. The audience, if you kind of consider the audience when you think of what needs to be conveyed or written up, it's, again, this socio-cultural frame in terms of how it influences what you put down. I think this was already discussed, too. So progressing from an outsider to a full participant. And that was, again, that's feedback that focuses on trying to help students adjust to some group norms, trying to reframe groups, being attentive to it. And rather than just watching these things happen and wondering, wow, it's just that group, actually doing something about it, giving feedback about that. You know, has everyone had a chance to talk? Has everyone had a chance to contribute? That's feedback oriented at participation. Okay, before we move on from this, any questions about some things that were mentioned? This is just revisiting some work from a couple weeks ago. All right. Well, you know where to find it if you need to revisit this. But I did promise we would revisit this when we parted ways a couple weeks ago. Okay. So let's take a look at something then. So you all have access to a copy of the VCE, right? So that's the Australian exam, right? There's also online. I've got a couple extra copies. But it should, I think if you're online, you'll find this in week 2. So, okay, you got a copy there. Copy. Okay, so here's my question. Given what was just kind of reviewed with respect to learning theories and assessment, how does this particular assessment, this high-stakes assessment, in terms of its design and the framing for how it should be implemented, how does it reflect or exemplify particular theories of learning? So in your table groups, see what you can identify. See if, does it cover the whole gamut from behaviorist to sociocultural? Does it really just focus on one thing, one perspective? See what you can come up with and be prepared to justify what you're going to propose here. And so if you're online, kind of go through the same thing individually, see what you can identify with respect to what was just reviewed with those different learning perspectives.
That's what I was leaning towards, because it does seem like you know, like it does really have choice and recall.
Juice?
Not really. Yeah. I did this thing for hours.
Oh, okay.
Right. I couldn't remember that like it talks about like I wasn't sure if that was
the kinds of self-discovery as we were studying the research, so they're like doing the whole project on their own. I think has that kind of
something back up to me in 5 group when I went back and read it again.
I couldn't find anything for that.
Not just one concept, because there's so many concepts that I know nothing over. So this to me is like, oh my god, I want to do that. But it seems like it's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Just like,
Well, and some of it makes this one
like the formula is phosphorus section. That so you know that can have like biology and there's like sparkle or it incorporates that.
It's not multiple choice, fill in the blank, doesn't replicate that stuff. Like these are you can't. So they're just gonna be taking a huge project. Like how is like if there's it's one what is it? It's one question. There's two starting points. Like everyone starts at starting point, but like how you start there. That doesn't fit into the whole fill in the blank multiple choice. Here's this where you're starting and explaining. So
Speed is an exercise.
yeah. So they're not. Like brief questions and answers, lots of repetition. I don't see that in all in this. So not.
Well, and you're
Especially because even like what the feedback on this could look like isn't knowledge is you guys correct or incorrect. Like this is like
You get part time.
you get so much partial credit and like you approach this to different but like if the calculation's wrong, it's not just 0 because you got it wrong because it's a project.
course or I think it was like on some level.
This reminds me of like my
It seems very focused. You know, like you're the like something that
they can start wherever they want it. Like one student was like their topic was I want to know how much money chocolate makes in the world. So they based their whole project off that. They have to like super open-ended. Not what I'm doing now, but when I was teaching practical medicine in Taurus, a high school down the street. That's totally skipping right now.
Telling you that you
He's awesome, but
otherwise I cannot.
anything I want.
So it's even
What is a mathematical way to represent how fast a baseball goes? So get from the pitch to the point of impact and like all that stuff. But it was like 30 each group right there. The AP kids got to do that because, and then you get graded and back to their test. They practice. Yeah. I was never in this process.
We did it. Well, mine was IB and we did it.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant. Sorry.
So that was actually like it was a part. It was like an assignment.
It's like the last half of the year. Right?
Yeah. I did like GDP per capita. How does the GDP per capita and obesity, like how are the McDonald's, the number of McDonald's in a country has that correlate with obesity and I don't remember how I did it.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You can do it completely different. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Got 30 freaking pages and like typing in all those equations. I remember saying
I would want to teach that class because I wouldn't want to do that. Like I would know the
and it had to be like it's basic. You have to use like their terminology because they can sense
you are.
And so
About another minute.
like your head to like think of their words, and you would get like my students to go fast. I'm telling you, they're like we're not an English class right now.
I'm just trying to think of like which is the last part. So we said social-cultural, cognitive, anti-surface, and zero behaviors.
Yeah.
Out of these three, do we think it's which one do you think? Yeah, because it's yeah, they're giving you a prompt, but it's the relation. It's like relation between students develops together.
my mind around.
But didn't it talk about how, like, if you didn't get a good grade, you could do, like, an interview? Like, you could do...
Oh, you get like a, you can get it back.
Yeah, like a...
I agree. I think social-cultural.
And it has definite cognitive in it. I think it's not 100%
Challenging beyond current goals. I think that's where it is.
That aspect is kind of
So we're going to kind of go around a little bit, identify one aspect of the VCE that you kind of locked into and how it might relate, justify your selection of a particular theory of a learning that it exemplifies. So we'll start with one of the folks online. So either Halen, Annabelle, or Aya. Anyone like to volunteer a response? Okay, Halen, go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me?
Now we can. Yep.
I would say that we talked about cognitive constructivist learning theory, and because of the fact that it kind of ties into a portfolio-based assessment. It's not just asking for answers, and there's only one correct answer. There's several ways that you can approach this test.
Okay.
Both questions seem to come from a different mode. Like there were several different moving parts that you had to think about before you could actually go into going into the work. So it was, I feel like, a little more open-ended than most assignments in math.
Okay, so with respect to the task design and kind of the expected response, I mean, you talked about more thinking involved. I mean, that right there, so the thinking process involved seems to suggest landing in more the cognitive constructivist perspective. Okay, thank you. Do you guys have like a chat room that you can pop up when you're online? Oh,
yeah.
Great, excellent. Okay, so let's see. Either Jana or Kat. Another aspect of the assessment.
was very similar to theirs. We have a question for you, but to answer your question first. So we talked a fair amount about how they established the mathematical concepts and techniques at the beginning of each section, and how that was, instead of prescribing to students the way they should solve the problem, it was presenting an array of options and allowing them to problem solve.
That's a question to me?
No, that's our answer.
That's your, okay.
So that was...
The array of options piece.
Right, which ties in again with the cognitive and the constructivist in terms of not just you have to do A to arrive at B.
So let's get our head around a little bit. I'm glad you brought that up. So there is some student choice involved in this, right? They don't have to answer everything. They can choose which path to take, and then that's actually going to influence which multiple choice piece they'll eventually have to take that goes beyond this. So student choice. So it's one thing to say, oh, okay, so that relates to cognitive constructivists. Why? Why do you think that might relate? Why do you think that's kind of justifiable within that frame?
They have to choose.
They have to choose, and so when you make
Judgment call on how they'll solve it. It's not use this and recall how you use it, but pick which you think will help you solve it, and then make sure you use that effectively.
Okay, so you really, it involves some kind of self-assessment process. You have to kind of evaluate where you stand. Do I have a better chance of this path or this path? So it does, just choice alone, invite some self-reflection. It can. I mean, you're going to have to go through either bushwalking with Kim or blood flow. You're going to have to decide, what am I better prepared for? Where's my knowledge base lie? What do I think I have a better shot at based on my preparation? So it connects. You have to evaluate your prior knowledge and your preparation related to this. And so it kind of touches on that metacognitive prior knowledge piece, which is nicely situated within that. So yeah, that choice, it just sounds like, well, choice on the surface, there's more going on there. When you have to make a choice about something, there's several things involved that roll out from that. So it's more than just a choice. Okay, you had a question.
We did, although our question might be answered by the other groups. But we're trying to figure out what would make this more sociocultural.
Let's see what the other groups say about this. Okay, so either of you want to pick on? Well, do you have something in the socio-cultural perspective that you think aligns with it? Okay, why don't you go ahead? Either one.
Okay. You can have it. So we said that simply, well, one of the reasons that it's situated or socio-cultural is like we were focusing on the blood vessel, blood flow problem, and that can be related in the bigger picture to like biology and healthcare and the human condition. And when it says at the very end they're supposed to like comment on their results and they're supposed to like dig a little deeper, they could make sort of claims about, well, if there's a lot of energy loss in the blood flow system, this could mean something about blood pressure, this could, whatever, you know, and they have to come up with a way that that affects some very realistic, real-life thing.
Their own situation could come into play. Family members.
Right.
What they know about health situations.
Like watching Grey's Anatomy or anything that they've seen that's related to medicine in humans, like I can bring up those contexts. Hopefully it's something personal. But.
So the relevance piece can do that for some students. It has the potential of delivering on not just making decisions about a solution strategy, but just how does this relate to other things in my life, in the world, in society. So, and there is some prompting there in the kind of report framework of making some of those connections. Nicely done. Someone from this group, feel free to add it. You could choose behaviorist, you could choose socio-cultural, cognitive, doesn't matter.
Me also leaning toward the socio-cultural perspective. Just because you get to use your resources around you, like talk to your teachers and I don't know whatever you want, as long as you put in that log book.
And also, it says some students may not perform as well on the test as the report may have indicated. These students will have a second opportunity in an interview to display. So showing your knowledge in a different way, I thought, was interesting. And then in the social-cultural section, it says knowledge is not extracted from context, but seen in relation to it. And I thought, basically, piggybacking on what they said, it's exploring like where this exists in other parts, and it's that context about it. And so we thought there was social-cultural, cognitive, and constructivist, but then zero behaviorist. So we were kind of...
Behaviorist was limited in this by design. Okay.
We kind of thought there was some behaviorist just because it's like they do have to recall information that they've learned in these courses. And isn't that part of the test is like they need to not only evaluate what the students know, but also evaluate their teaching and like what the course has brought to them too. And so in a way, that seems like it's a little bit of like recall in that sense. Like they're testing whether or not the students have learned something and whether their course.
So let's get even a little bit more.
It depends on how. Like, I'm wondering what the class looks like before they get this.
Yeah.
Like, how are they teaching it? Like when they say recall, do they mean okay, you're gonna have to use Pythagoras to solve this, or is it here's an open-ended problem? What will you use to solve it? Because if they model it in that way, then it would be, in my mind, I guess, then it would be recall because they're recalling what they've done as opposed to just mimicking this formula.
Right, and it's also like you can never get away from recall. Like
yeah.
You have to recall something.
Yeah.
So whether or not that's behaviorist or not, I think so.
Yeah, so not only you have to recall, okay, they mentioned Pythagoras here. Okay, so immediately, what does that mean? And now you're looking for Pythagoras within the context, so now you're getting to the cognitive piece as well. So it's because you're applying it in new ways. It's not just as typical, here's the triangle, here's the right triangle, I need to find the hypotenuse. You have to see it within the context of the problem, but you still have to know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So it goes kind of hand in hand together. So maybe non-existent, you're seeing a kind of a very light treatment of behaviorism and recall. I think those are defensible. When you see certain equations written a certain way, how do I treat an exponent? Where's differentiation going to come into play on this? I mean, these are not trivial equations that they're working with for a high school examination. So you do need to figure out, how does differentiation work in this particular context? If I'm trying to, I know I need to use it, but if I don't know how to differentiate, I'm at a loss. So there is this element of hard to engage in applying your knowledge in new ways if you don't have that knowledge. So they kind of go hand in hand together, right? Okay, any other comments regarding this assessment and its connections to learning theories?
I'm just confused because for some of the same stuff they said that was sociocultural, we thought made it constructivist cognitive, like the fact that they're really assembling this body of work that will help them answer it and picking that and coming up with that and seeking, it even says, meeting with the teacher, some of the, we weren't clear if there would be group work, but kind of this like process of solving it over time. So, is it both?
I understand. I understand why it might be, it looks like it's both. So the way I interpreted what Lauren was saying was, you get to go to other people. You get to choose experts. You get to use the world as your encyclopedia to draw from. But you have to still know how to use that resource and draw from it. You have to, if you're not socially engaged, if you don't have a good network, and this was kind of one of the problematic features we saw of this, it could be inequitable for someone who's not as well connected with where to go to for resources, depending on who their parents are, depending on who they engage with on a regular basis. So that part would be more sociocultural, drawing from tools and resources, and that being part of the explicit part of the assessment. The choice of strategy, so once you have that information, the choice of strategy and how to formulate a solution, I would say that's more on the cognitive perspective, because you still have to figure out how does this all piece together, and laying out from those various resources, here's an appropriate strategy that's defensible, based on what I know about mathematics and the context. Yeah?
And I think you brought up a good point, too, because I wonder that even when I think about, like, I teach first graders, I feel like a lot of what I'm teaching is establishing recall. And so I'm wondering, like, when does recall stop at behaviorism and become something you're deciding what to recall? Like, even as you said that, like, oh, I've got kids that are choosing to still use one-to-one correspondence because they trust it more. And so is that a reflective choice versus the kid who's like, oh, I can count by fives and I figured it out? Or is that a different type of recall?
Yeah, so great question. Because these learning theories are at play no matter what age the learner is. Right? It may not be as readily apparent with some of the, actually there's another example, if we have time today, we'll get to it. It's actually a different resource. But if they have the one-to-one correspondence, which is initial strategy for counting, but now then they have another strategy where they're skip counting, or they're seeing 5, or they're seeing pairs, and so you see, okay, now you've got a handful of strategies to choose from. Now, I'm going to give you a task that's open to a range of strategies. I want to see if you can use a more appropriate strategy. I know you do it. I know. But that would be getting to more of a cognitive perspective, because you're seeing
the open-ended question that allows the student to pick the strategy.
So it's not just solve this problem using this strategy.
And they're still going to recall all these strategies and decide, but it's just because it's recall.
And there's a place where you want to see if they have that particular strategy. Have fluency with that particular strategy. But then there's other places where you want to see, you have several different ideas to choose from. I'm not going to tell you what strategy to use. I would hope you choose maybe this or that strategy and not this one, which is going to take you about 20 times as long. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So do you see the way things are organized, and can you use that to your advantage, rather than always seeing you have to count everything individually? Or maybe can you organize the set in a way to where now you can use another strategy rather than always doing the direct modeling, direct counting? So it comes into play in a huge way, because students are requiring a significant number of strategies week to week, month to month, and not just in math, but I mean across the subject areas. Students work in groups, right? Sometimes in pairs. They have their buddies.
Yeah, we have children partners, space partners, table groups.
And there's a reason.
Yeah, they're all very strategically
Okay, so you're drawing from a socio-cultural perspective there.
Okay, so if I have, because I have it very strategic that like a high kid is here and they are always across from a low kid, so they are unlikely to work with each other. But that high kid sits next to a medium low so that they can support each other. And then the medium high is next to the low so that they can support each other. But then when it's something that's more at a similar level, they use face partners because that person's closer to their level. And so I mean,
That's amazing. I'm sorry.
So that's a very simplistic behaviorist perspective. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding, of course. No. So you've basically got zone of proximal development going on, which keys into, again, sociocultural learning. You're pairing people who are more likely to support each other by their proximity in terms of the way they're able to articulate. So how you're organizing them draws, I mean.
And that would be the sociocultural. So I can have an assessment that really hits on all three theories, because I felt like that article said these things can't overlap.
I think that's why they're all separate. I think like when something's called a theory, like that's.
It invited an eclectic perspective too. Mary James invited the consideration of an eclectic perspective. This is great. Okay, so no, I'm glad. These are great questions. So a couple things before we head into the break. So I wanted to make sure we touched on these a little bit. So this was from Chappis and her colleagues. So you had 5 different learning targets identified. So, and keep in mind, you're already getting a sense of this with some of the examples given. This is a general classroom assessment resource, the Chappis text. It's not specific to math or science. So you're seeing and there's a good reason to actually start thinking about that. So we can kind of think beyond the bounds of what's typically done in a math or science class. So you see things like knowledge targets, which are pretty straightforward, right? Knowledge targets, they describe these, especially with the examples given, these kind of fit into the frame of recall and procedural knowledge, right? Knowing the proper steps, knowing how to execute those steps. So this starts on page 46. So recognizing, identifying, knowing, naming, and then, I mean, a lot of this is really recall. Now, some of this, it seems like, let's see, describes where mitochondria and chloroplasts come from. I can see that can be recall, though. Describe how organisms interact with each other to transfer energy and matter in an ecosystem. Now, if you draw up a diagram and you expect students to replicate that diagram, I could see how that's kind of just a knowledge structure that you expect to be replicated. If it's more fluid than that, and they're going to see kind of more relational pieces between those organisms, and they get into more detail on that, then it's probably slipping into the reasoning target perspective. So there is some kind of gray area to some of these examples that are given. But you'll see even just the verbs that are used here are very much organized around identification and recall. Now, as I mentioned before, the reasoning targets are where this is where it goes deep very quickly, and then it moves on to the others. And so they give the kind of this overview of kind of a Bloom's taxonomy perspective of different reasoning targets. These tend to be kind of the higher level reasoning goals that you often see. So things like inference, analysis, comparison, synthesis. Now, when we do the activity after the break, and you're trying to get from what's articulated in a particular standard to what does that mean for students? I mean, it's one thing to see a list that includes inference, analysis, generalization, and so forth. All right, what does that really mean? And how in the world are you going to communicate that to students if you want a more student-friendly goal to be articulated? Because just writing it verbatim is, we may be at a loss as educators to actually know, what does that really mean? What should I expect to see in the context of this domain? So there's a lot here packed into the reasoning targets. Fortunately, we're going to spend a lot more time with this. And even, this is just one perspective. This set of 6 different patterns of reasoning that are identified is just one example. we're going to look at a few different examples over the next couple weeks, and you'll eventually kind of land on one that makes the most sense to you, is to try to identify, how do I get reasoning beyond recall? What does that look like? How do I know it's there? How do I develop an eye for seeing differences between these types of tasks that elicit this? Okay, so here's the weird thing. So you get beyond knowledge and reasoning, which is kind of very familiar kind of set of goals for learning targets for us. But then you have skill targets. It sounds like something, but it's not. If you look at how they define skill targets, this is actually kind of a real performance. This is like, one example given was using the microscope. Do I know how to properly use a microscope? Do I know how to set the balance properly and reset it and make sure before I start weighing things that I know that it's been zeroed? In mathematics, can they construct a perpendicular bisector using a compass? That would be a skill. It relates, yes, to knowledge, but it's also a skill. Do they know how to use a compass properly? Do they know how to use the tools properly? So it's really about a demonstration of performance or performance. Yeah, Diana.
So not necessarily like a formula sheet, but formulas that you need in math that you need to be able to use to get through the problems. Would recognizing that you need a formula to be successful, you need a certain formula to be successful, would that be a skill? Because these formulas that are always given on those sheets that you've seen on Praxis and ETS and whatever, would you consider that be a skill or a knowledge target? Because I consider those, understanding those formulas just as much as a physical tool as a protractor would be sometimes.
I understand that. I guess it depends on how that understanding is exemplified, how that knowledge or reasoning is exemplified, and that's where the skill comes into play. Because, let's say you have a coordinate plane mapped out on your classroom floor. Having the students walk in a path that represents exponential growth along that coordinate plane in your classroom, that would be actually a skill, because that's a demonstrated performance. It draws upon knowledge, because you have to kind of know, it should be a curve that looks like this, but actually they're acting it out. It's more of it's a physical performance. So at least how this group of authors defines skill targets, and I know we talk about skills, this is just how Chappis defines it. So just realize when they talk about skill targets, they're really talking about a real demonstration or performance. Just be careful with that. Really, the skills that we're more familiar with when we think about skills in math and science, the procedural skills, that lands more in the knowledge targets. That's really knowledge targets. And maybe blends into reasoning targets depending on how they're used.
Is that unless they're using an external tool? I'm thinking of math, knowing how to use your calculator to find a maximum of a graph or something like that.
Using all those functions that are on this little computer.
Yeah, right. Or in higher level math, knowing how to write a program to solve some sort of math problem that you want. That's using an external.
I would say that's intersecting both, because you're using a tool to accomplish something. I know how to use patterns. I know what formulas are about. Okay, now I'm supposed to use this in a spreadsheet. Right. Do I know how to use that in a spreadsheet? That would be a skill. That would be an acquired skill. So you're using a tool. Software, I think, could be considered a tool, and use of software, or even developing the tool, as you say, programming. Products, students make something, right? So that's a very kind of simplistic way of putting it, but that's how they define a product target. What have students made? Students own products. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something, I guess if something's written on paper, in some ways that's concrete too. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something made out of clay or sticks, I guess is one way to put it. The student made something that represented a situation. So it's their product. It's a student's own product. It keys in on the report that students are making with this. Have they organized the report in a way that fulfills the criteria? Yeah, there's several things going on with the VCE. There's knowledge targets, there's reasoning targets, there's product targets, because they have to develop a report that fits all these parameters. What's the expectation for a report? The report itself and how it's put together is a product. So, I mean, really the skill targets, the product targets, and actually the one I really want to talk about a little bit more is the disposition targets. The skill and product targets are something that we just kind of almost, sometimes they happen, we don't really think about them so much. Oh, it would be nice to have a project that students work on and they're making something, or it'd be really good for them to do a lab in this case, or it'd be really good for them to create something that's a three-dimensional figure so they can actually see. There's reasons we do that, but we have them do that without actually thinking about that as there's a good reason to have them make something. There's a really good reason to have them perform something. But those are two targets that rarely enter, I mean, with the exception of conducting a lab in science, those are two targets that rarely enter the math and science curriculum. But they're everywhere else. I mean, when you think about it, they're across the other subject areas. You know, you're acting out a play in language arts. You're not just reading verbatim Romeo and Juliet. You are actually, you know, you're engaged in things in different ways across other subject areas, in the social sciences, in physical education, in music, in the arts, and yet we get to math and science and it's just, that's all we care about. Well, it is unfortunate. What is unfortunate is we don't have as many great examples of this. They're out there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, especially the whole maker craze that's happening now that does integrate some things with math and science. That's really a big push for this. We need more of this in there. Why? Because it's more engaging for students. It's more interesting. They made something, and there's something about that makes it more interesting for students. Yeah.
Would vocational programs fall more under skill and product?
Yeah, I mean, because certainly our vocations. I mean, teaching. Teaching itself, the practice of teaching, is a skill target, right? I mean, it combines a few things, but often it's a skill, as they define it. It is a skill target. So teaching, having students teach, would be a skill target, because you still have to have this stuff going on, but now it's applied in a way where you're pulling it together to communicate. That's a skill.
So when you have kids, or students, I should say, be the teacher, like in the way that you even do in here, is that a skill that
it's giving you a chance to assess what's going on here in the context of what's being performed here. Well, because how the communication is organized, the choice a student makes, I mean, it varies. Those are still choices they have to make. It's not just, I know this stuff so well, okay, well, why don't you teach it? I can't do that. Or, I would gladly take over the class. Right? So, it depends on the student's confidence as well. But the disposition, you had a comment? Comment.
Disposition, actually go down what you
Yeah, so disposition targets. I guess the big question I would pose is this a target that we value? And in math and science, this is where things have been falling apart. This is why there's been this huge emphasis on STEM, because we haven't been reaching students with STEM. And maybe part of the problem is we've been so focused on this, and I understand, with the various audiences, with testing and all sorts of other expectations, there's a good reason to focus on these. But if there's any way to make this more of a human endeavor that involves a wider range of skills and things that students can use to demonstrate what they know, then it might actually be just a bit more interesting. It might actually tip the scales here, where this isn't like any other science class I've had before. This is actually kind of cool. We usually get that with math, so not to pick on you guys. But no, I mean, there's actually a public hatred for math. So why shouldn't we care about disposition targets? So why shouldn't we think about that as a potential goal, as you know, by the end of this unit or two, or by the end of the school year, I hope to see a change in students' dispositions. If that's part of your goal set, you'll find ways to assess it, keep track of it, pay attention to it, and accomplish it. Question now.
So when I was looking at disposition targets in mathematics, it says, use oneself as capable of doing mathematics. So then I started thinking about like my history being assessed that way. Every time I had to like write a proof or create something out of nothing, so like all my geometry class that I took a few years ago, like 2 years ago, where it was just prove this, you have to use Euclidean geometry, so you have like a set of constructs, but like I have to create it and then you turn it in, and then it would just be drafts that you turn it in over and over again until they're perfect. So that's when I would have to view myself as capable of doing something. Like because math is, well, depending on where you stand, like creating something from nothing or uncovering something that's there. Like that's what math is. Like at the heart of math, like it's this ability to see yourself in it and then just work with what you have. But then when you're teaching it or you see these books or you're giving out worksheets or tests, it's all the knowledge and reasoning, and people don't understand that it's coming from disposition.
Sure.
A long, long time ago, we take it for granted. So I've been able to see myself at the collegiate level, and I guess now because I have a math degree, which is even crazy to say, but I still don't believe it. But for my kids to view themselves as capable of doing mathematics, like to start from nothing and build something, I don't even know where I would start to create an assessment that shows that or gives them that confidence or that metacognitive ability to say, I don't know where to start, or I can't see myself doing this, or what are the next steps. But like, even with the mathematical practice standards from NCTM, like it says, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, reason abstractly and quantitatively, model with math, and like all these awesome goals and these that Common Core is aligned with that we want to do, but I'm supposed to do a new topic every day.
Sure.
Like, I can't.
Well.
Yeah, somewhat, but they seem to be, in the sense of, do we value this? I think more and more we're finding the importance of the disposition targets, but we're still in this idea of where does it work, how does it work, what type of tasks promote this, and where does it fit into the curriculum, but it's still all the sides are still trying to find that middle ground. But it's so interesting because in these practice standards that are now everywhere, these are really disposition-based. Make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, reason abstractly and quantitatively, construct viable arguments. Like, you're not fighting with the person, you're arguing and debating the answer. Yeah. My students still don't have, the disconnect between the facts and the person, I just think is so interesting, and that's all disposition.
So there's a huge, it's a great point, Diana. So there's a huge universe with activities and tasks that can address these two. If you're interested in things in this realm, it's going to help you filter and select some possibilities here. And there may be some tasks, I don't have a better way of doing this. I don't have a better way of conveying this information. And I know it's something that students don't like a whole lot. But how else do I address logarithms, right? Well, there you go. So, but you get my point, right? So, but until you find an alternative, you're going to have to kind of stick with that universe that doesn't connect here. But if you're looking for it, I can guarantee you'll eventually find it, or you'll adapt it, or you'll be sensitive to, you know what, it's been 2 weeks, we need to do something that addresses this because we're not getting anywhere with this. So if it's part of your goal set, you're more likely to address it. So I'm very confident in that. If you ignore it and only pay attention to these two, well, you get what you set the table for, right?
What you test is what you get.
Yeah, right. So it's about opening this frame up a little bit more, and what's typically associated with math and science. One of the reasons to have a more general resource is to see, everyone else is doing this. We could too. It's actually how science and math were developed. So, what are ways to engage students in this work as if they were mathematicians and scientists? And that can get to things like authentic assessment, but also it addresses dispositions. It could address some skills. Okay, so we're at 6:10. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to have Julie and Drew do a guest teach, guide us through an activity. So we'll reconvene at 6:20. Okie doke? So I think we've got a pretty tight schedule. There's a lot of things going on in the next hour and 10 minutes. So, and you guys don't worry about the stuff I sent you earlier in terms of the schedule. Do what you need to do to get closer to the activity. Don't. So, yeah. Well, I'll tell you to quit at 7:30. All right. So, just some framing for what they're about to do here. So, thank you, Drew and Julie, for being willing to do a guest teach this early in the course. Because of how early in the course it is, they kind of had to amp up their planning. There was a little bit of a break, but still, we didn't meet. We actually kind of Skyped in and checked in with each other with what their initial plan was. So there was a kind of a brainstorming session. They had an initial sketch of their plan, and then they kind of checked in with me. If there were any ideas regarding resources that were needed, that was discussed. So there was this kind of back and forth a little bit over email in terms of the planning. The reason I say that is just for those of you that are listening in now or here in person, just so you know what's coming with your guest teach. So I do have to say, though, this is really Drew and Julie's plan. I mean, they identified the activity. They had read the readings for the week. They identified, we think this is going to be a useful activity. And so now we're here. So they've prepped some stuff. They're facilitating some things. I'm taking some notes. The only thing, when you see me taking notes, what I'm doing is just recording the conversation interactions. That's all. I'm just basically keeping a record of their session, nothing more. So as I told them, if you see me frantically typing on my laptop, doesn't mean something went seriously awry and I got angry or something. I'm just taking notes. So, and then I send them the notes of the session along with a couple questions, and they reply to it over the next week, and that's it. And they're done with the guest teach. So I'm grateful and glad they decided to do this early, and I think you're going to at least get a chance to see what this is all about from a learner's perspective. So they're going to get mic'd up here so the folks online can hear, and give them a moment to get set up, and then launch in whenever you're ready.
I feel official.
Cool. I keep expecting to hear myself on the mic, but it's just you people who can hear us, right? All right. So can you guys online see this? I don't know how this works.
Yeah, they see it.
Awesome. All right. So I'm Drew. This is Julie. Hi, everybody. I don't know where to look in the camera. So this week's, like we all did reading about goal setting, right? And that was kind of the idea of the readings this week. We're talking about assessment, obviously, but one of the first steps to designing assessment is what type of goals do we have for our assessment, what type of goals do we have for students' learning, and how do we kind of like bring those two together to make sure that we're assessing what we want our students to learn and we're doing that well. And so everybody did some good posts on D2L and had some interesting things to say. And so we thought we'd do our activity with two sort of main features. So first we thought we'd just kind of like get the discussion started a little bit, be thinking about goal setting by going over a few questions that were based off of conversations on D2L, give us a chance to like kind of get in the zone of goal setting, talking about that a little bit. And then we thought that it would be good to do a goal setting activity. So how do we even go about setting goals in terms of looking at course standards from the state or from the NGSS standards or any certain level of standards? So how do you use those standards to set goals? Or if you have a set curriculum at your school, how do you look at that curriculum and then break it down into something that's like feasible for you as a teacher, and how do you translate that language in terms of goals to language that your students will understand? And so we're going to use, and we'll show it later, but we're going to use the 3 steps of goal setting from Erin Furtock's piece, the formative assessment piece. She had some specific steps And then we'll go ahead and do that and see how we do, and then discuss and talk about, is this a good way to set goals? Would we like to do it differently? What about it makes it challenging? Can we do it in 20 minutes? Or is it more feasible to do it over the course of a summer? Do you want to add anything?
No.
Okay. All right. Cool.
All right. So as far as discussion questions go, I run under the assumption that nobody actually goes back to D2L to read through like more than their question or response.
So
That's true. That's true. I did this week too. So as far as discussion questions, there were a lot of questions about like specific readings in response to like one of the readings, which was cool. And like you read that one in depth, which is good. But we decided to look at kind of a bigger picture. Like we read 3 different readings that were really like 3 different angles of attack on goals. So we wanted to look at how do those sort of come together. And then the Schoenfield piece was just sort of an interesting piece anyway about different goals for different levels. So the first question is, in what ways should learning goals be presented to students? Big idea question, specific learning objective, goal level, etc. Because there were 2 different pieces. Furtak piece kind of implied that you should just always like tell your students everything. The other pieces were like, it felt a little more hesitant to me. So go ahead and discuss that. We'll give you guys 3 minutes in like small groups, and then we'll kind of share out some main ideas.
Yeah. And you guys online, can you do your little like cool chat thing?
Yeah, sweet.
All right. So yeah, 3 minutes. Just take them one at a time too. So the first question.
Oh, I was thinking 3 minutes for the first question.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so weird that you can't.
Oh, yeah. This is my, and
The Mike's version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I tell them at the beginning, like, this is the question. And it's amazing how many especially when you're not the other. And I say, my goal at the end of every day is to have connected. And the first day have like
little facts
that they can, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's really weird. We were talking about that earlier, that there's no camera in the same.
And what I look for is
Every other single thing that you chat on, the camera is at the same spot as the screen.
at a middle school, like on these questions.
Your science.
Okay. But yeah, I was tough. I thought post on board is like top of the.
So did you really like this?
Yeah.
Like this seems that it's not the diagram. Even just like the diagram of like how they did it, I was like, we need this like version. Like this would be so nice for me. Because I'm like, I think it's
Really trying to understand.
Mine are much. I mean, I do have it's much more.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, when I posted on D2L, question was, like content stuff. I posted it on Twitter. So one day the principal like sent out, like, look at all of our content objectives and one of mine is doing here. So this is like how some teachers are doing it. And everyone's different. And then we go to these PDs and then
Can it go on audio? Can you hear me well enough?
yeah.
Oh, really?
We can hear and they change the way they want to do this. The style and then how they want to word it and this.
Hello? Yes! Yes! Yeah, this is so much better. Okay, I was like, I know there's a way because they did it right away in teaching and learning biology.
Cool. So can you hear me too?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, I agree with Halen. I really liked Word Talk's like big idea question, and then how like small learning objective always tied back into the bigger picture. I know I definitely don't do that. I only do it lesson by lesson, but I think it's good to introduce like the unit goal.
Yeah.
And tie that. Oh yeah, and tie that back in.
I don't know what's happening with Julie. Like sitting on the mute button or something.
I think one thing that I really liked was I loved in Furtak's piece. I loved the graphic of like the stairs.
Oh yeah.
It had like a arrow to formative assessment, because I think like I feel like I read about this stuff a lot, but for some reason like the diagrams are so much more helpful for me. It's one of the reasons I really liked Understanding by Design when we did it in EDI or whatever. Is it was like all diagrams and like concept mapping sort of stuff, and I responded to that a lot better. But I really liked the little like stairs that she had. It was easier for me to see like how all these parts like come together and how you need formative assessments after every part.
Yeah. It was, I really like that, because I feel like the way I approached my units was like, okay, like we're going to work on this section here, and then I'm going to test them on this section, not like learning goals. And so, yeah, I agree. Like when I saw that stepping staircase and like where you should be assessing them based on those goals, I was like, oh my God. And then she talks about like curriculums, and even if you're given a curriculum, like you can still structure it in that way and like come up with learning goals based on the curriculum. She's the bomb. Yeah, I really like that.
An expression in an equation.
Okay.
I remember, I didn't take notes this week on the show and field.
I really like the show and field one.
Really?
Yeah, it was talking about like standardized testing and like in how different people approach it and why and what they're looking for and.
So really briefly.
We'll jump around. Ladies online, we'll go to you guys first.
We always do online
People first. It's like a tradition.
now, I know.
What did you guys think?
Hello?
Hello.
Okay. Hello. Okay. We talked about the Furtak piece and how we really liked the like diagram of like the stairs, because it made it really easy to see like how you can have these like how you can have a big idea question at the top of the stairs, but then have all these like smaller objectives, and how like even if you're given a curriculum, this is still something that you can do. Is like creating these like little steps, like a little step formative assessment that all leads to like these big idea questions.
Sweet. So did you guys talk about when you
would present that to students, like all the way through continuously, or?
We really just had time to talk about literally.
That's good. All right. Thank you. Halen or Aya, do you guys have anything bad? I know Annabelle's always the spokesperson.
It's a term of
Halen was the spokesperson last time.
Oh.
I'll step it up.
All right. So let's jump to in real life, I guess. You guys want to build on that, add to it?
We talked. What did you point to? Sorry, I'm so okay.
Both of you?
We talked a lot about the big idea and really how to isolate that and really come to it, and how that might represent kind of, naturally your big idea of a unit or a semester, and then how maybe your parts of your learning goal are what really break down into the lesson, and it connects to the idea of the steps and your formative assessment. But I spent a lot of time wondering about the big idea.
Yeah, definitely. And that build up to the big idea. It sounds like that was a common theme for sure. Back table, anything to add?
At the beginning, do you tell your students or do you kind of keep it a secret? I'm all about showing them, like, why not? That's the goal. I want you guys to achieve this, so I want to tell you what I want you to achieve. I'm not going to keep it a secret. So it's posted at the top of all my, like, note guides. It's on the board. I use it as the essay question at the end of the test, and some of them still didn't catch up by the end of the semester, but, what can you do? But, yeah, I'm all about posting them. I present it to them. all the time. And I try and connect back every like lesson, like my like takeaway, I call them. This is what I want you to get from today. This is what I want you to get from today. That goes back to the big idea.
Our second question basically builds on that idea. So I'm glad that you talked about, always telling your students, because that's, I don't know, that's what I did as well. I always had an objective up on the board like you're supposed to, and, would direct kids there at like the beginning or the end of the lesson, like, oh, surprise, you have a formative assessment. Look at what question it, right? Uh-oh. And I was going to read this next question, and it died.
Sorry. Wait.
That's okay. The computer died?
No,
It just got tired.
Oh no, it's password blocked tired too.
There you go.
It'll eventually.
Okay. You can read it though still. Without...
Yeah, so online, Kat asked a really good question, which was talking about the show on field piece and what the different levels of goals, right? And we kind of, Drew and I grabbed onto that today, and we're like, well, when do you tell your students the different goals for these different assessments, because they are different? And would you always tell your students, like, beyond just the day's learning goal, you're taking this test because, or, like, how does that interaction work? So we were interested in your thoughts. So take another 3 minutes, and we'll talk about that one briefly, and then we'll wrap this up and move on to actually doing goal setting stuff. Cool.
All right. Okay. So we're talking about number 2?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were talking, so when do we talk about the whys? I don't know. I try to say it a lot in class. I think I make the mistake of doing it too often, like, afterwards. So, like, my AP kids, they took a test, and I'm like, and then a lot of the times I, like, told them after, like, when we self-assessed the essay, I was like, we are doing this today, right now, because I want you to know, like, how in detail the AP test goes. I want you to see how it's graded and see how people are going to be doing this. And then, like, talking about, like, why I made the test the way that I did, which is, like, I had some book questions and some old AP questions, and then this free response, and, like, why, I don't know. And so, especially for the multiple choice, I made the mistake, like, I feel like I keep coming back afterwards and explaining why I am assessing the way that I'm assessing afterwards. And I don't know if that's because, I don't know, I think I don't know.
Well, it's probably a lot different for you said AP, right, or IB?
Well, AP. So, like, but I do the same thing with my honors, like one of my honors classes as well, which are freshmen. And I, like, talk about it afterwards. Like, we did this type of assessment because of this. And so I feel like I'm really, really open with them about why we're doing this assessment the way that we're doing, but I tend to do it after they've already taken the assessment. So I'm trying to do, like, and so those were the exams that I had, like, a couple weeks ago. And so, like, this week I'm giving exams for some other classes, and I try to be really upfront with them at the beginning, because trying to trick them about format is not something that, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been trying a lot of different formats that they're not used to, and so on purpose, but
yeah. So for
more, like, upfront, and, like, that's not, the kids that know it and understand, they're going to do well on the test. And so by hiding that format from them until like the day they take the test, I don't think it does them any good. I don't know.
So do you specifically only talk about the format, or do you talk about like the content or like the goals of the reason why they're being tested on this material?
I talk about content, or like I'm really, really open with content, like what's going to be included, and like how in depth they should go, and like answering questions and that kind of stuff, and giving like a general overview of like what they can expect.
Yeah.
But like for example, so my AP class, the exam had 3 parts. There are book multiple choice, which are like regurgitation, factoid stuff. There's the AP multiple choice, which is like a little bit more conceptual, and then there's the free response questions, which are straight up essay with a shit ton of detail.
Yeah.
And so like the reason I had the book multiple choice questions, which like are very different format than anything they'd see on the AP test, is because I want to emphasize that you need to know the little factoids in order to
Put the mouse a little bit. So
There you
go.
All right. So I could tell that this one got the blood pumping a little bit. The gals at the back table were wondering, well, what do you mean by goals taken into account by the teacher? And in the show and field piece, they talk a lot about policymakers and parents and whether those goals should be taken into account as well. Back table, you guys want to kick us off?
Yeah. So we were just talking about how like the different audiences, like the different stakeholders. So just to piggyback off of the first question, like the learning goals, she puts hers on her note sheets on the board every day. So that's every day the kids are updated on that, whether they change or not. On my Schoology page today, after doing the readings last night, I have daily expectations, which is just what are we doing for the day? And then after our readings, I added a learning goals section because I was like, I'm not doing this enough. I'm not being transparent, but I used to be. So in today's learning goals were understand the difference between expression and equation by giving an example of each. Today's exit ticket was, what is the difference between? So I connected it back. So that was like that's like for the teacher goals. But then we started talking about what do they call it here? Policymakers and publishers and test developers. Today, for example, I had a meeting with the librarian about PARC and what I could be doing to prepare my kids for PARC and what that looks like. So I don't have the lessons planned out, but I know for a fact before PARC, I want 3 lessons or 3 45-minute periods where I have a Chromebook cart with the kids and we're just going through what does select all that apply mean as an answer choice? What does it mean, the graph and calculator section versus the no calculator section? Where are the calculators? There's a formula sheet. Where is that? So my learning goals for the kids those days aren't going to be understand verbiage of select all that apply versus choose one option, but the learning goals were be familiar with the standardized test so I don't get screwed over. We don't get screwed over. The school, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I'm not going to be very transparent with that, but I'm still taking lesson planning time and goal setting time to keep that audience in mind, publishers, developers, and administration. So the lesson goals for that with kids, I want you to be more familiar with this testing scenario or this verbiage. So I'm going to have to do that, and there's a time and place for it, but I will only give that much thought for those few lessons. Sure. Because it's back on us.
But you'll be explicit with the kids about why they're doing that. Is that what you're saying? Like they're
the days where it's like we're in the computer lab, like what's the purpose of today?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be like, guys, we're not. But my plan is to say, this is the test that's gonna happen, and I don't want you to have to sit here for 60 minutes, but I want you to try your best. Let's just get used to I'm gonna let them know that it's just to situate themselves in the situation, not to test them.
Yeah.
It's just so they can become familiar with the interface. But I will be, because they always talk in, what are we doing today?
Yeah.
It's not enough to say, oh, we're doing group work anymore, because once you hit middle school, they actually start asking. Which is good. If you want kids to be asking questions, you should have them be thinking about the day, the overarching view of the day, because then someone's like, well, how does this connect with the last unit? Someone asked me that today, and I was like, yes, let's do this.
That's awesome.
Expressions, now we're doing equations. We had a whole conversation about that. So the not more material you give them, but why not tell them? It's their learning experience. But I'm not gonna say, hey, we're doing this park stuff because I want to get retired. Like, there's not.
Let's jump up to this front table. You guys have anything to add?
Our conversation went in a lot of directions. So we talked about everything from test anxiety in first graders, which is
Heartbreaking. Oh, that's heartbreaking.
to pros and cons of transparency with different levels of these things, especially as it relates to accountability in terms of things like accreditation and state regulations, and kind of wanting to be really forthright with students about that, like,
Yeah.
about that process, but also needing to frame it in a way that still emphasizes and centers on their learning, as opposed to making it feel like standards come in and take control. For sure.
So like framing it as it's valuable for them in terms of whatever they want to do in their future, in terms of their learning, rather than like, you just have to jump through this stupid hoop because it's told by the state or something like that. Still trying to frame it in a positive light, even though we may be frustrated and really like think it's about getting our job back next year or something like that, right? Okay. Yeah.
And I mean, still being realistic about the benefits for them. I mean, we don't want to go in and say, this is the best test ever and you're going to learn. I mean, middle ground there.
Yeah.
So honest but not sugarcoating it, or yeah.
Online?
I'll take it up for the team this time. So we talked a lot about formatting as well.
Right.
Can you hear? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Oh, you're super quiet.
I yell.
I'm like yelling right now. Okay, so just like Diana's group, we talked a lot about formatting and what they should expect. We specifically talked about like the AP testing with Annabelle's like AP Bio. She includes like a part where it's like multiple choice and some short answer responses as well, and why she chooses to format the test that way in just regular assessments so they can prepare for the AP testing as well, so that they have like transparency and knowing what the expectations are. And I do a similar format for math tests as well. Sometimes I include the Scantrons onto the test because I realized that the kids, if the answer is like 6.5, they have no idea how to fill out the Scantrons. They would start off from the left side, or they wouldn't know how to put the decimal as like a separate slot. So I've been trying to incorporate that just so that they can prepare for standardized testing too. But normally I don't do multiple choice tests just so that I can give them partial credit. And for my teacher purposes, I know what I need to like retouch and analyze versus a multiple choice, which doesn't really give me much feedback of what the students know or don't know.
Cool.
I guess that's the thing that bothers me too about standardized testing is like my freshmen, I do like what I was talking about, like I try to, like I haven't done a single multiple choice anything for my freshmen, but for my AP kids, I have to, because even though it's like not the best way to really like see their understanding, but I have to do that, especially like the formatting with what I was talking about on the Scantron is really weird. And so they have to practice with it and like learn all of those strategies. And I think sometimes it can be frustrating because it's not, I find myself a lot of the times in class being like, okay, we're doing it this way because this is the way that the AP test is. And I've been starting to like get on like, oh, and also this is the way that colleges can be as well. But yeah, having to justify everything because like, oh, because this is what the standardized test is.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
It's interesting that we were talking about skill-type reasoning targets or skill-type learning targets or goals. It seems like test-taking skills are like a part of that. They're like they're like a reality in our education system now, and it's a bummer. But what's that?
More so than disposition, I would say.
Yeah, but also at the same time, as we may all hate them, like if we avoid them, that might be it's probably not beneficial to our students because they won't be prepared to do that. You guys, yeah, Halen, nice hand raise.
I think it does suck to have to talk to kids about test taking and state standards and why we have to take them. But at the same time, if you look at, especially if you're dealing with high schoolers who are becoming of age to vote and be active participants in society, like if they know how these things function, maybe they will vote for, education mandates that are going to get away from heavy testing. So I think, it can be maybe frustrating to have to talk about, but I think it's also, important in letting kids know being really transparent about what's actually going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, Annabelle. Nice hand raise again.
Actually, based on what Halen said, it kind of made me think of the way that my school is handling standardized testing. So the PSAT and the practice SAT, they took them 3 weeks ago, and they just got their scores back last week, or the scores just came in last week. And so, my school had a 2-hour, professional development that the whole idea was okay, we're not getting rid of this. We can't get rid of this from as a small school. And so how do we teach this kids in the classroom the skills that they need? And of course there's a huge discussion about test taking strategies and being really frustrated. A lot of teachers were frustrated about they felt like it was a trick, test taking strategies. But one of our APs brought up a really good point, which was there's no science section on the SAT. But there is science on the SAT. It's just in the form of reading. And so she asked this question to the science teachers especially, is well, how much how many reading passages do you do? Especially with your freshman, sophomore level classes, and trying to get more critical reading involved within the science as a way to prepare them for the types of reading passages that are on the SAT. But in a very in a way that made it much more logical. That makes sense to me. I do think kids should be able to read long passages and understand them. And so her reframing from this different perspective, I thought was really useful. And our kids also, they have one-on-one meetings where they're pulled out of class to talk with their counselor, and they go through their entire score sheet and talk about their strengths. So what type of questions that they do really well on, and what questions that they not do so well on, and they have the students try to find patterns within their own test taking. And so that self-reflection I think is really, really cool. And I haven't heard of another school, and please, I also don't know if other schools do this. It's not I talk about it with other people a lot. But I thought it was a really cool approach to accepting that standardized testing is here. So what can we do to acknowledge that different people need to see different things within it?
Yeah, definitely. And to circle back, that's kind of why I asked this question, right? Because we all don't want to do standardized testing. But on the other hand, it is important as teachers to maybe recognize that there are skills involved in that kind of testing, and that we do need to acknowledge that and maybe set goals for it, like Diana was doing, and like you're talking about with reading more paragraphs about it with your younger kids. All right, these were really worthwhile conversations, so I'm glad that we spent so long on them. But we super have to move on to our actual goal-setting stuff.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I'm just going to do a brief intro because this is for all of us to have time to work on. But, we all know that as teachers we live in sort of a world of standards. We have standards set forth by our district, we have the state standards, we have federal standards. That could all change. And standards in some ways are kind of scary, and they kind of seem like somebody's telling me what to do or how I should teach my kids. But also at the same time, they provide a very useful guideline for what topics our country deems as important for our students to learn, and they provide a framework for us to sort of break them apart and put them into little pieces that we can address throughout our lessons. So they give us a good foundation to start planning for assessment. And so the beginning of planning, as we all know, as we read this week, is goal setting. And so we thought what would be useful today is to kind of take the approach from the FERTAC piece, and she has two approaches here, and basically what we want to have you guys do is the following. Everybody in the classroom here should have a set of standards in front of them, and I think are they the Colorado State standards?
Yeah. These,
Some of them are district.
if you have the district standards, those are the St. Brain standards, and much of it reflects the Colorado State standards. The colored document with the cover, it's color. Those are actually the full state standards for that particular course or grade.
And so you ladies online too, this should all be in the resources section on D2L as well. So there's sets of standards that we can work from, but also in the FERTAC piece, we also saw that sometimes we don't have to work just from standards because our schools will have developed units or curriculum for certain courses, right? And those have an even more in-depth outline of what is expected for us to teach. And so taking either a standards as a starting point or a curriculum or unit plan as a starting point is kind of the way to start looking at goals. And so what we thought would be useful for today is for us to do that together and for you guys to do that together. So we thought it would be best if you guys could partner up by subject. Some of us are not the same subjects but are willing to work together. Aya, if you want to try and chat with Diana, maybe, so you guys could do math. And then Annabelle and Halen, if you guys want to do high school biology or whatever is useful for you. And you guys can use either the standards that are on the table in front of you in the resources online, or if you have a unit plan in mind, or if you have a particular standard that maybe you've been wrestling with lately, like how do I approach this standard, you can use that too. And so the steps, we kind of, as FERTAC outlined, they're on the projector here. They're also in the FERTAC piece. And so if you're working from standard, it was started by basically looking at the standard and identifying the science content in that standard. This is in terms of science and math. Again, it would be in terms of math. So what's the important content that's hidden in that standard? And then the second step was unpacking the standard into an overarching goal. So what's like, in this standard, what can I frame as the big goal related to this? And sometimes that would be like a unit goal or like a week-long goal or something like that. And then not only do you have a goal, but you have a big idea question. Like in science, it would probably be something like phenomena-based that is addressing the standard. And then the third step is then to write supporting learning goals. So if you want your students to achieve this big overarching goal and answer this huge question, what are the steps that they need to take to get there, like the little ladder steps that FERTAC had outlined. If you're working from a curriculum or a unit plan, it's the same idea, except for instead of looking at the standard, you're looking at the unit and going through basically the same type of process. So we thought the best way to format this too is you guys should have this sheet on your paper, which is actually an awesome sheet from the back of the FERTAC book. And online, ladies, again, this is online. And this is Planning Sheet A and Planning Sheet B, and they're called Setting Up Learning Goals Working from Standards or Setting Up Learning Goals Starting from a Curriculum. And it basically outlines the steps that you're supposed to go through. And so we thought with that in mind, you guys could just sort of tackle this as a group together. And then at the end, after we're done with this, so we'll give you about, I think we'll just let them go. What do you think? 20 minutes?
It's 7 o'clock, so 20 minutes is fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that?
All right.
7:30 with the debrief, so that's fine.
So we figured
What would be beneficial is for all of us to go through this planning sheet together, looking at a standard and kind of developing some goals together. And then at the end, for the last 10 minutes, let's discuss how that went. Is this a good method for doing that? Would we do it differently? What was challenging? What was easy? So with that in mind, does anybody have questions? This is kind of an open-ended task, I understand. But
I have a question. So do you want all groups to work from, I guess we'll be planning sheet A, working from the standard first?
I think they should choose whatever they think is most relevant to them, especially the people who are teaching right now. You might have units already outlined in front of you that you are grappling with, and I think you should go from that if you want.
But not to do both within the 20 minutes.
No. Just choose one, either a standards-based or a unit-based. Yeah.
Anybody else have questions?
Okay,
Right.
cool.
Choose one approach.
Yep, choose one approach and go for it.
So I haven't I don't know, so that I do I don't have math. You do more? That course is too much.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are. Hey.
Okay. So I get super intimidated by looking at standards and then trying to plan from standards. So I figured having a curriculum might be a lot easier.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, then, honestly, Halen, the shittiest part about teaching is not having enough materials. And
In
so,
terms of physical materials, or?
yeah, everything. So, like, for instance, like, yeah. Like, the most.
Hey.
Yeah, you can work with.
Hi, you're everywhere. I know, I am everywhere.
Okay.
I muted the other one. I don't know. I think they can still hear me though.
Yeah.
No, we cannot hear you on the big screen.
No, on the online version.
Hi.
Can you just mute me? Oh, I can mute myself.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't hear you. You're all good.
Okay.
All right. So is the worksheet that we're looking at, or the handout, is it the A-B planning sheets?
Oh, I was just looking at the screen, their PowerPoint.
Oh. But they handed out sheets and they said go online and get the sheets.
Yeah, I think that was for, like, it's the same thing, because they said they're using the St. Vrain high school biology standards, which is exactly what I'm sending you, except with all of everything else. So, like, how the science department at St. Vrain has taken those standards and already done a ton.
Right. So, but they put two worksheets up. One was a template for deconstructing a content standard, and that's in the back of Furtak's book.
Okay.
Oh, no, that's in the. Hang on. I think that's in the back of the Pearson book. So it has knowledge, reasoning, skill, product, and that's the type, and then content standard. And then it has your underpinning learning targets, knowledge targets, reasoning targets, skill targets, product targets. And then there's one from Furtak. So I don't know if you just want to go in there and look at the.
Okay, I just sent you the standards.
Okay, sweet, thanks.
Yeah. I am, kind of confused about what is going on right now. Okay. 15 different things. Holy shit.
Yeah, I know.
What the? I have no idea which of these we're supposed to be looking at.
Okay, I just wrote them a.
Yeah, because telling us that it's online doesn't help. There's 15 different things.
Not at all. All right, let me check my email so I can get that.
And I guess we would. Sorry, say that again.
It's so nice coming to class online.
Dude, I know. It's so nice. Because now I'm, like, instantly home and done when I'm done.
Yeah. It's pretty nice. All right, pre-IB curriculum. So these students are on, this is your honors?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is pre-IB, but it's also like, for regular bio, we just take some of these out. But everything that's in red is required, and everything that is in green is like additional extra, if you have time, sort of stuff.
So sorry, red required, green additional.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to pick one of these that you're going to be working on soon, or?
Sure. Right now, I am up in quarter 2 genetics, which is on page 3. No, 4, page 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Yeah, so like tomorrow, this kind of sucks because we're doing notes. Tomorrow we're talking about
Dude, this is so nice that you have such a like stringent curriculum. That's pretty.
I mean, and all schools should have this. Maybe not with the third part where it says like all the activities. Like that's not necessary. I don't know. But
it's so different from, like, I had no curriculum lined up at all for my student teaching. Like every week was just like, what are we doing this week? Like, I don't know. Like, no one knows. It was crazy. So it's like, this is pretty cool.
I mean, the thing it's an IB school, and so they have it down.
That's great.
IB part, but
you know that you're doing 2.7C tomorrow, right?
Yeah, ish. I mean, you can't just do like. Tomorrow we're doing a lot of this stuff because tomorrow we're talking about transcription and translation. So we're going to be talking about RNA. Then we're going to cover a ton of this in one day. The issue though is what?
Okay, that makes sense.
So the issue though is, as nice as this looks, it's not a plan. Like this is not like, these standards aren't ordered.
Okay.
At all. And like these, for example, like all the activities on the right, I don't have any of that. I know what have your DNA and eat it too is because I Googled it.
How weird is that?
And so it's one of those, so the way that my school runs it is like, here's the curriculum, do whatever the hell you want. All you have to do is just cover these red bullet points. And so it's nice that the red bullet points are there, but at the same time.
How's it going?
It's going great. We're looking at pre-IB curriculum for Annabelle's class.
Sweet. Good. What standard are you guys, or decide on a standard yet?
Yeah. Recognize that proteins carry out most cell activities and mediate the effect of genes on physical and behavioral traits in organisms.
Right. Cool. Do you guys have any questions? I'm just checking in because that's what they teachers do.
Yeah. Just want to fill out step 1, identify the standard, and then figure out like our small learning goals and then big questions, right?
Yep.
And
pretty much.
Recording goals for the unit. Oh, okay. So that's what we'll be able to do and we'll be able to know.
Yes, should be.
All right. Yeah, I think we got it.
Yep, that's supporting goals. And yeah, mostly I would just focus on that one. If you get into, we've got about 10 minutes, so I would just skip sheet B and just focus on sheet A.
Okay.
Cool. Sounds good. Good job.
Bye.
What's sheet A?
It's the sheet, it says at the top of the sheet, where did it go? So the document is called FERTAC Planning Sheets A-B.
Oh, I see it.
Yep.
Okay.
So we identified the standards for that's not the unit though, right? So unit was the top one, genetics, right?
Yeah.
And then big idea question. Just form 2.7C into a question, essentially.
Yeah, I think
like how do proteins carry out most cell activities?
Yeah. I'm like juggling all these different.
I know, my screen is like.
It's getting frustrating. Okay. I'm just going to look at the curriculum. Okay, recognize it. So I guess I would say like, and mediate the effect of genes. Yeah, we talk about like how we talk a lot of, I think, and this is the way that I describe to my kids, like we talk a lot about DNA being a blueprint or like DNA being like coding and it's like genetic information, but like all of that doesn't mean anything. It's like when you have a code, it's just like a representation. But like what actually does the thing? And so I think that relates to this particular standard. So like what big question would be like?
It feels like the big question would it be in terms of like the entire, I'm confused, would it be in terms of the entire unit, or would it be in terms of that day?
I think, so I'm thinking about entire unit, sort of deal-ish. So like, how do genes affect traits in an organism?
Well, right, and they have,
that would be like, yeah.
And they have these questions outlined in the front of your curriculum, so why is it possible for a cell from one species to express genes from another species? So those would be your big questions.
Yeah.
And then your smaller, what was your learning goal?
Yeah.
Would be then broken down into those smaller chunks. Is that how they break it down then? Like, is that the main planning sheet?
What do you mean?
Like, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, the way FERTAC is planning this out is your big question is, like, unit question, genetics. And then you, so what are the questions that we use to get to that big Okay.
So, so I would,
what's the difference between DNA and RNA?
Right, so I mean, I think you can even start up before and go, like, describe the structure of a DNA molecule.
Okay.
Define a nucleotide, like, identify the different nucleotides.
Yeah.
Describe the base pairing. So, like, you're building up. So, like, you're defining the nucleotide. What is a nucleotide? And then you're talking about, well, what are the different nucleotides? And then, well, how are those nucleotides bound together? And then, keep zooming out. Okay, if that's like the structure of the DNA molecule, like what's the structure of a chromosome?
Right.
And then, if for the chromosome, like in cell division, like when does the chromosome split? And then going to replication, like how does that happen? And then talking about like, okay, so now we have this, like we've talked about DNA, so like now now that we know about DNA, we know how it's replicated, but like what does it actually do? Like what's the purpose? What's the function? Like how does it affect any of our traits? And then that goes into like transcription and translation. So you'd have to describe the three main types of RNA. Mm-hmm. Okay, compare RNA to DNA. And then like what is transcription? And then what is translation? How is distinguish transcription from translation? And then recognize the relationship, like overall relationship between genes and proteins. So like I'm doing a bunch of 2.7b and 2.7c this week. That's what I'm doing this week. DNA replication, transcription, and translation.
Okay. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's kind of nutty.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you have to do a lot of notes to get through that? Or what else are you?
Yeah, so like DNA replication, and it depends on the class. So I've noticed it's kind of hard to plan. I have 3 different sections of this class, and so it will really, really depend. Like, for instance, one of my classes, so how I had planned it was doing DNA replication notes for half the class, and then modeling DNA replication with Play-Doh, where they have like all the different enzymes and they're like modeling it. And one of the classes the whole time because they had a ton of questions about mutations that we haven't gotten to yet. And then a different class, it took the whole time as well, but they had a ton of questions about the Mendelssohn-Stahl experiment, which is like how they figured out that DNA is semi-conservative. And so it's really, and then my third class had no questions about any of it. And so they breezed through it. So it's really, I don't know. So it's really interesting there and like the speed of that. But I mean, they don't go into the depth of DNA replication that like you probably remember from college.
Right.
Like freshman DNA replication is like describe hydrogen base pairing and like how and I of course like I do a lot more than this because like now that I look at it, none of the stuff in red has to do with replication.
For 2.7.
Yeah. Huh. Maybe explain the events of the cell cycle. Which is really interesting now that I look in that. Possibly, I don't know. I mean, base pairing is involved in it. It's very interesting, actually, now that I look at it. So, like, I've spent a whole day on replication, and it's not in any of the red stuff.
Yeah, what?
But it's in the standard.
That's so weird.
And so, but, like, it's the same thing that, like, one of the things that I was shocked with last year when I was going over the standards for high school biology for Boulder Valley, and for state standard, mainly for state standards, there is no mention of having to know the functions of different organelles.
For which? For what?
For biology. There's no, like, you do not have to know, like in the state standards, you don't have to know cell organelles. Like, it's not in the state standards, but cell transport is in the state standards.
So you can't know transport without knowing the organelles.
Right. And so it's like, that's kind of how I think of a lot of this stuff, is like,
so ridiculous.
Yeah. And like, how can you talk, and especially like, one of the things of the state standards is like knowing the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms. Well, the only fucking, the main fucking difference is that one has membrane-bound organelles and the other one doesn't. But if they don't know what an organelle is.
That is so stupid.
It's so stupid.
Good God. Who's making these standards? Just about
I remember, because I was like typing up, I had an observation. I was teaching, in student teaching, I was doing something with organelles. And for my observation sheet that they wanted, I don't remember if it was Pia or if it was Katie, but she wanted what state standard are you addressing in this lesson? And I'm like, none of them. After I researched it, I was like, I can't even justify any of this stuff. Oh, it's right here. I see it.
So bizarre.
2.5C. On page 2 of the big thing. 2.5, we're talking about functions of cell membranes. And osmosis.
But there's nothing about organelles.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's just cell membrane stuff.
It's like, no wonder, yeah.
But at the same point, like,
teaching and learning biology, like, you can't. And they're talking about organelles without actually talking about organelles.
Yeah. But at the same point, I don't know, like, it's a part of me that, like, why do they need to know? Why do they need to know the Golgi?
Yeah.
You know? Like, yeah, the cell membrane is basically the most important, like, the cell membrane and the nucleus are, the really, really important parts.
Yeah.
You know, but, like, why can't we teach organelles, like, as we come to it? So, like, teach the mitochondria when we're talking about cellular respiration.
I just feel like that was such a heavy hit thing for me in bio.
Yeah, I remember that too.
Huh. I wonder when that changed, or if it's just different standards for pre-IB.
Yeah, but I've never seen a high school bio class that doesn't talk about organelles.
Yeah.
And so even though it's not in the standards, I think everyone must realize that before talking about cell transport, you have to talk about, like, the stuff inside of a eukaryotic cell.
Yeah, so you are covering it.
I mean, they did last semester.
Oh, okay.
So I don't have to, thank God. I get the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
But yeah. Interesting. I never noticed that DNA replication, while it's in the standard, isn't in the red stuff. Which is, like, giving you a good idea of the fact that, like, I don't know. It's a good, like, starting point, but I think people very rarely reference this.
They very rarely reference this curriculum?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because they've done it for so long.
Oh, that's true.
Like, they know what they're doing. They're not going to come back. Like, they probably don't realize that DNA replication doesn't have any representation in the red stuff or in the green stuff. You know?
Yeah.
Like they know that they're covering it. And I think a lot of it comes from
Bye.
She like muted them and then she FaceTimed me from her phone. And,
Okay, so good job, everybody. There was lots of good conversations going on. I think we all. I can hear myself for a second. I think we all.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I think we all realized how challenging this is, especially to look at something big like a standard that's like pretty ethereal and general, and then to unpack it into something that's like realistic and can be formed into smaller type goals and big idea questions, especially in 15 minutes. So I don't know, everybody probably read the FurTalk piece, but they do a nice job of showing how to break down like a big standard into a learning goal and a question, and supporting learning goals. Unfortunately, all of them are in science, not mathematics. But also, I think, like for example, in this standard, the standard is talking about different characteristic properties of materials. And the big idea question is talking about things sinking and floating, which is truly related to density. And so it's not really covering, the big idea question doesn't cover every single piece of this standard, but it does hit a big part of it. So I think in looking at this, it's like you kind of have to take a chunk of what the big standard is and then start to address it. Because to make it a question or a learning goal that addresses the whole standard is almost impossible, it seems like. So just real quick, I wanted for us to consider some of these questions about this process that we went through. So first of all, do you think this is a good process? Do you like this process of looking at a standard or a unit and breaking it down into goals? Or do you think there's a better way to do this? What makes this process challenging? And what would you do differently if you were setting up goals for your classroom, learning goals? Is this the approach you would take, or do you do something a little bit more simplified? And I just want to throw that out to the class. So if anybody has an answer right away, that would be awesome. If not, just kind of discuss it with your neighbor. Does anybody have an answer you want to get us going to any of these questions? Or so, actually, let's frame it this way. Instead of do you like this process, what did you find challenging about this process? What was frustrating about it? Yeah, Diana.
So in Safe Brain, and I'm pretty sure BBSD as well, like we get these very detailed unit plans.
Okay.
Extremely detailed, like.
Yeah, I think those are online too, actually.
I'm online right now. It's a Google page, and they're awesome. And you can tell, like, a curriculum person and professionals spent a lot of time making this. It says graduation requirements, 21st century readiness competencies, inquiry questions, relevance and application of standards. And it's really awesome. But even just essential vocabulary assessments, even just sitting here now and trying to be really basic, like, what are the learning goals? What's the unit goal? What's the big idea question? I still feel like I might as well be sitting in these standards.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Even though they broke it down and they took the standards that are listed right here and kind of, I feel like I'm drowning even more. Because it's even hairier with all this vocab and things that I need to sit through. And I were looking at this and saying, okay, well, looking at all this, where do you see a unit goal? Where do you see a big idea question? And we were thinking, these inquiry questions aren't really big idea questions, and these unit goals are really way too broad. And ideally, I would like them to do the understanding, but I wish they just took the time and just took all this time they used to make this and do the, Wiggins and whatever, understanding by design. Like, if you're going to take so much time to do this, you might as well make it more transparent and literally user-friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Not dumb it down for teachers, but how we take those standards that we see make learning goals for students, make your expectations of teachers even clearer. Because I know that was their goal, but I think it almost created more of an issue, like too much information. So that's what I get from this, but like in the sense of the process of sharing goals and talking to someone about it, like I just gave me like tons of ideas for what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Yeah, so a big point of this that we were coming to as well is like not doing this alone seems horrifying to me. Like I would not be able to sit at my house at my desk and be like, okay, I'm just going to get through this like standard, right? You know, it'll take me a couple hours today. Like it seems like you have to have a teaching partner or somebody in your department or several people to work with and come to some sort of consensus on what you want to do as a group or bounce ideas off each other. Because otherwise, you're just going to keep spinning your wheels, I think, and just kind of not really get anywhere. So I agree. I think that's a really good point. Does anybody want to add to that? Or yeah.
I was just going to say, to kind of go off first, I student taught in Adams, and they gave us like this document that was like, this is what you do, this is what you do, these are the learning goals. And I, with my student teaching supervisor guy, we got frustrated because it's like, well, that's not what we think the goal is. So even if you are, like, you want this, like, Tuesday you do this, Wednesday you do this, but it's like, no, like, I don't want to do this, and my kids are stuck up on Tuesdays, and now my Thursday's messed up because I'm doing what I'm supposed to do on Wednesday. And it's like, in a way, you kind of, I mean, I think these are a little excessive, ridiculous, but you need something kind of between what I had in this that's like,
is this the standard? Is that what
yeah,
you're
that's ridiculous. Yes.
Right.
Yours
almost too stringent in the fact that it's like too narrow and defined on what you should be doing, and yours is the opposite, right?
Yeah, they didn't want to pigeonhole us into be like, we're giving you a curriculum, and it's like, but you are. Like, you're just calling it something different. And I didn't like the lady that was designing them. I didn't agree with her. There was a whole bunch of stuff. I didn't agree with her philosophy personally, so I didn't like the way that she was laying out the units and stuff, but it was kind of frustrating to be like, we're not giving you a curriculum, but you also have to do this, but we're not going to do this, and it was just to, like, shove it down your throat, but, oh, we're not doing anything, you can do what you want to do.
But not really.
90 seconds.
Yes, so we don't have very much time left. Does anybody want to add something that they felt would be beneficial to the class, some sort of final thought on this activity or this goal setting? Like, anybody want to add? Internet ladies? Nope. Aylin, nice.
I thought it did help clarify it. The way that Annabelle's pre-IB curriculum was set out was pretty clear. Like, it had the overview of what the unit was going to look like, and then it had a breakdown of each like subsection. But I feel like the way Furtak's sheet broke it down, it kind of made it more accessible to also figure out where you were going to assess.
Right.
Which
That's cool. Annabelle, can you share that with us someday? The IB?
Sure.
Just because it sounds like it was helpful to see that. So,
Do you have an electronic file?
I can't hear you.
Do you have an electronic file?
Yeah.
Could you just email that to me, if it's okay, if it's not proprietary, and I can put it on the handouts?
No, thank you. And I also may be easily impressed because I didn't have any standards to go off of with student teaching. So I saw that and I was like, oh my god, that's amazing.
Nice.
So to give some perspective, all this curriculum is, it took the Great Brain High School Bio Standards, like on the left-hand column, and then it took, because it's I work at a heavy IB school, and so it's not necessarily an honors class, it's a pre-IB class, and so they took all of the, like, freshman bio standards, and then they, like, found all of the IB standards that fit in those, and they just, like, put them together.
Gotcha.
And the IB standards are, like, much more concrete.
Okay.
So,
Just as an example.
Yeah, that's cool, though. Yeah, we definitely share that with us if you can.
All right. Did you want to?
Yeah.
Did you have a final thought?
I am gonna check. Some of my teachers one of my teachers is really private about her stuff.
Okay, yeah.
No worries.
Let me
make sure. Cool.
Well, first of all, thank you, Drew and Julie, for putting on the first guest teaching.
It was fun.
To get our heads around planning and some aspect of planning and what this might entail. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to mention is, again, this is just kind of a taste of the process. I thought what was productive about
what was happening was you were making sense of different aspects of the standards. Some of you were seeing standards for the first time, trying to locate what was important, trying to figure out what do I need to pay attention to, what's not really all that important, and then what do I do with this with respect to a big idea question, and what does that mean for activities. So we're going to pick this up again next week. We're also diving further into the reasoning goals and what it means to assess reasoning beyond recall. So again, thank you very much, Julie and Drew, and thanks all. Really, really nice to see the engagement and the activity and trying to grapple with this stuff together. These are not trivial things to deal with. Okay, so that's it for the evening. So just a reminder, try to think about your what kind of domain you're going to work with in math or science or some other area for your assessment. But I'll give you some guidance this week also in terms of what's happening on D2L for the discussion board. So just look for an email coming from me and something in the news feed. Other than that, I'll stick around if you have questions, and we'll see you.
Thank you.